The night the fire started, I thought the worst thing I'd have to worry about was the casserole burning in the oven. I was in the kitchen, barefoot, scrolling through a recipe video on my phone when the smoke alarm shrieked. Not the soft, chirpy warning kind of beep, this was the piercing, gut-clenching alarm that makes your heart slam against your ribs before your brain can even catch up. I spun around, and that's when I saw it. Flames licking up the curtains by the back door. They moved so fast, greedy tongues devouring fabric, reaching higher than I thought possible. In seconds, the kitchen glowed orange. My throat closed on the first inhale, hot smoke pouring in like punishment. I dropped my phone and screamed for Mark. My husband had been upstairs with our daughter, getting her ready for bed. I barely made it 3 steps before the heat hit me, like opening an oven set to broil and stepping inside. The smell was thick, choking, bitter plastic, and burning wood. "Emily!" Mark's voice thundered from upstairs. Then I heard our daughter crying. My legs moved before my brain decided. I stumbled toward the staircase, heat blistering the air, smoke turning the hallway into a tunnel of shadows. The rest is fragments, stitched together in flashes. Mark barreling down the stairs with our daughter wrapped in a blanket, her little arms clinging to his neck, his eyes wide, frantic, darting from me to the flames. His voice breaking as he yelled, "Out! Now!" The crash of something heavy falling in the kitchen, the whoosh of fire consuming it. We made it to the front door. My lungs screamed with every breath, and when we spilled into the night air, the coolness felt like a second chance at life. Neighbors were already gathering, some holding phones, others shouting, pointing, herding us farther back. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. I should have felt relief, gratitude. Anything but the gnawing cold that crept over me when I saw her, Linda, my mother-in-law, standing across the street, perfectly composed, hair pinned, arms folded. She didn't rush to us. She didn't ask if we were okay. She looked at Mark, then at the crowd, and with a sharp, deliberate voice said, "Emily didn't make it out." I froze. I was right there, coughing so hard I nearly collapsed, hair singed, pajamas streaked with soot. I was alive, barely standing, clinging to Mark's arm for balance. Yet she looked at me, then looked away, repeating louder, "She didn't make it." My son lost his wife tonight. My knees buckled, my head spun. People turned toward her, their eyes darting between my smoke-blackened face and her steady gaze. I felt invisible, erased by a single sentence. "Mom, what are you saying?" Mark snapped, his voice raw. But she didn't answer him. Instead, she clasped her hands dramatically, as if preparing for sympathy. "She's gone," she said again, like she was practicing the line for a stage play. "Emily didn't survive." I opened my mouth, but the air clawed my lungs. No words came out. My chest rattled with coughs. One of the neighbors guided me toward the curb, pressing a bottle of water into my hands, whispering, "Honey, sit down, breathe." Sirens cut through the chaos, flashing red and blue across the smoke-hazed night. Fire trucks screeched to a stop, hoses uncoiled. Boots pounded the pavement. Paramedics rushed over, kneeling beside me, shining a light into my eyes, checking my pulse. And still, over the crackle of the fire and the shouted commands, I heard Linda telling anyone who would listen, "She didn't make it. She's gone." I wanted to scream, to stand up and point at myself, but my body betrayed me. My limbs shook. My throat seared with every inhale. The paramedic's voice cut in, calm but firm. "Ma'am, stay with me. Don't move too much." Mark crouched beside me, gripping my hand so tightly my knuckles ached. "You're okay. You're okay," he kept repeating, as if saying it enough times would make it true. That's when a police officer knelt down in front of me. His uniform was streaked with soot from helping at the scene. His face was solemn, but his eyes sharp, watchful. He leaned in, his voice dropping so low I almost thought I imagined it. "Ma'am," he whispered, "are you ready for the truth?" I blinked, throat raw, head pounding. The truth? My gaze flicked to Linda, who stood like a queen surveying her court, accepting nods, feigned gasps of sympathy from neighbors who seemed unsure whom to believe. Her expression didn't flicker. The officer's hand brushed mine gently, pulling me back. His whisper lingered in my ear, heavy with something more than concern. "Because this fire, It wasn't just an accident. I couldn't move. My body was trembling, my lungs burning, but it wasn't just the smoke anymore. It was something colder, heavier, settling into my bones. Linda caught my eye across the street. For a fraction of a second, she smiled. Not a warm, relieved smile. No, this was small, sharp, almost satisfied. And I knew, with a clarity that cut through the chaos louder than the sirens, this night wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. When the flames were finally under control, and the fire trucks kept their hoses humming like steel serpents, I sat wrapped in a thin blanket, staring at the ash drifting past the streetlights. My body was shaking, not just from shock, but from the surreal weight of what Linda had said. I was alive. Everyone could see I was alive. And yet her words, "she didn't make it," hung in the air heavier than the smoke. It wasn't the first time Linda had tried to erase me. That's what I kept thinking as the paramedic pressed an oxygen mask to my face. It wasn't new. The fire was new, yes, but the feeling of being made invisible, that had been simmering for years. I used to believe Linda would come around. When Mark and I got married, I told myself her cold stares were just adjustment. She had raised him alone after his father passed, built her whole identity on being the axis of his world. Of course she'd struggle sharing that space. I excused the comments. You'll never cook like his grandmother. You don't fold shirts the way Mark likes. Little cuts disguised as tradition, as guidance. But the cuts added up. One Thanksgiving, she shifted the seating chart so I ended up at the far end of the table next to a stack of coats, while she kept Mark glued to her side like a prize she had no intention of sharing. When dessert came out, she handed him his favorite pecan pie with a smile and announced, "I made this just for my son. Emily doesn't really eat pie anyway." The room laughed politely. I ate in silence. Then there was our daughter's second birthday. I spent weeks planning the party balloons, cupcakes, even handmade invitations. When the day arrived, Linda walked in carrying a sheet cake 3 times the size of mine, with her name scrawled across the frosting, "From Grandma with love." She announced loudly to the guests, "This is the real cake. Emily tried, but I know what kids actually like." Cameras flashed. Her cake made the photo album. Mine didn't. Every slight followed the same script. Linda playing the martyr or the savior, me cast as the extra. And Mark? He noticed, I think. But noticing and confronting are 2 different things. He'd squeeze my hand under the table, shoot me a sympathetic look, then let his mother dominate the stage. I told myself to keep peace. That's what good wives did, right? You don't ignite wars over petty slights. You keep smiling, keep folding shirts, keep making cakes no one eats. Until the fire. Sitting on that curb, coughing smoke into the oxygen mask, I realized Linda hadn't just minimized me, she had declared me gone. Out loud. Repeatedly. To neighbors who now eyed me with a confusion that stung more than the blisters on my arms. She'd taken the fantasy she'd been writing all along that I was irrelevant, unnecessary, and spoken it as fact. And here's the worst part. Some people nodded. Not because they believed I was actually dead, but because on some deeper level it seemed plausible that Linda's version of reality carried more weight than mine. I thought back to the day Mark and I told her we were engaged. She didn't congratulate us. She didn't hug me. She leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowed, and said, "You think you're strong enough for this family? We're not easy people." At the time, I laughed nervously, convinced she was joking. Now, years later, the echo of those words felt less like a warning and more like a vow. The truth is, I had always hoped for a different story. A normal mother-in-law, one who would slip me family recipes, babysit without judgment, or call just to chat. I wanted the warmth you see in holiday commercials, where generations gather around a table without barbed comments hidden in cranberry sauce. I imagined one day she might finally look at me and see a partner for her son, not a rival. Instead, every year tightened the same knot. She wanted Mark's loyalty unchallenged, her control unthreatened, her place at the center untouched. And me? I was a shadow in her play, tolerated but not embraced. The fire should have changed that. Tragedy, survival. These are the moments that shake people awake, remind them what really matters. But as I sat there under the flickering glow of police lights, listening to her repeat my death like a headline she'd written, I understood something sharper. For Linda, tragedy wasn't a wake-up call. It was an opportunity. That's why the officer's whisper cut so deep. "Are you ready for the truth?" he'd said. And in that instant, I realized the truth wasn't only about how the fire started. It was also about the years of quiet battles, of little erasures that had built to this night. Mark brushed ash from my hair, his eyes darting between me and his mother. He looked torn, like a man standing between two worlds on fire, and I knew he'd have to choose. For once, silence wouldn't save us, because Linda had spoken my death into existence, and the question that hung in the smoke-filled air was simple. What else was she capable of saying, and who would believe her next time? The officer stayed crouched in front of me while the fire crews swarmed around, spraying what was left of our kitchen. His voice was steady, but his eyes searched my face like he was checking if I could handle what he was about to say. "Emily," he said, lowering his tone so only I could hear. "We've been called to this address before. Not for fires, but for disturbances. Did you know that?" I blinked, confused. My lungs still stung from smoke, but my mind snapped sharp. Disturbances. He didn't mean me. He meant Linda. "No," I rasped through the oxygen mask. My throat ached, but I forced the words out. "What are you saying?" The officer glanced toward Linda, who was still across the street with a small cluster of neighbors around her. She was speaking with wide gestures now, shaking her head in mock grief, one hand pressed dramatically against her chest. "I'm saying," the officer continued, "there are things about tonight that don't add up. The way the fire spread, the accelerant pattern." His eyes narrowed. "And the fact that your mother-in-law insisted you didn't make it out before anyone confirmed anything." The words hit harder than the smoke. My heart slammed against my ribs, a pounding so fierce I could hear it in my ears. For a moment, I thought maybe I misheard him. Maybe the ringing in my head twisted his meaning. But his face told me he wasn't exaggerating. Mark knelt closer, hearing part of it now. "Wait, are you saying this wasn't an accident?" The officer didn't answer directly. He stood up slowly, glancing between us, then back at Linda. "I'm saying we'll need to investigate, and until then, you should be careful about who you trust." I followed his gaze, and that's when Linda's eyes caught mine. The crowd around her was still murmuring, but she looked straight at me as if the two of us were the only people left on the street. She smiled again, not warmth, not relief. Something else. Something sharp. Mark saw it too. His grip on my shoulder tightened, but he didn't speak. He didn't have to. The air between us told its own story. The paramedics insisted I go to the hospital for observation, and I let them guide me into the ambulance. Mark climbed in beside me, his face pale, his hand never leaving mine. But even as the sirens carried us through the night, I couldn't shake the echo of the officer's whisper. Not an accident. Lying on the gurney, oxygen mask, fogging with each shallow breath, my mind spun backward. Pieces I had ignored now sharpened into focus. 3 weeks ago, I found the smoke alarm battery missing in the downstairs hallway. I assumed it had fallen out, maybe during cleaning. I replaced it without a thought. A month before that, Linda had accidentally knocked a candle onto the carpet during dinner, laughing it off as clumsy hands. I stayed late scrubbing the wax out while she scolded me for not choosing stain-resistant flooring. And 2 months earlier, she had told Mark in front of me, "Accidents happen when you don't take care of your home properly. Some women just aren't fit to keep a house safe." I'd swallowed the insult like always, telling myself not to make it bigger than it was. But tonight, with flames still smoldering in what used to be our kitchen, those moments no longer looked random. They lined up like breadcrumbs, leading to this exact night. At the hospital, doctors checked my lungs and skin, declared me stable, but the word stable felt foreign. Nothing about me, about us, felt stable anymore. Mark paced the room, running a hand through his hair, muttering, "She couldn't have, she wouldn't," but his eyes betrayed the words. He didn't believe them himself. I thought about our daughter asleep at a neighbor's house now, spared from the smoke, spared from Linda's declaration that her mother had died. How do you explain to a child that her own grandmother tried to erase her mom with a lie? How do you explain that some lies cut deeper than fire itself? When the officer visited us at the hospital later that night, his notepad tucked under his arm, he leaned close again. "We'll be asking everyone questions," he said. "But I want you to prepare yourself. Sometimes the danger isn't the fire. It's the people who want the fire." I swallowed hard, the oxygen leaving a metallic taste in my mouth. "You think she wanted this?" My voice cracked, not sure if I wanted the answer. He didn't nod. He didn't shake his head. He just closed the notepad with a snap and said, "Be ready." Mark sat heavily in the chair beside me, staring at the floor. I touched his hand. "Mark, what if he's right?" He didn't look at me. His jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on some invisible point ahead. Finally, he whispered, "Then we're not just surviving a fire. We're surviving my mother." And in that sterile hospital room, under fluorescent lights that buzzed like secrets waiting to break, I realized the flames were only the beginning. The morning after the fire, the hospital discharged me with an inhaler, burn cream, and a warning not to overexert my lungs. But the heavier weight wasn't in my chest. It was in my thoughts. When we pulled back into the neighborhood, the house was nothing but a blackened shell, yellow tape wrapped around the porch like a cruel ribbon. Neighbors stood in clusters, their whispers breaking off as soon as our car slowed. And there she was. Linda, standing on the lawn of the neighbor across the street, sipping coffee as if she were attending a parade. When her eyes met mine through the car window, she smiled. Not wide. Just a tilt of her lips, a twitch that made my stomach turn. Mark gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles blanched. "I'll talk to her," he muttered. But before he could step out, 2 officers walked up the driveway toward us. The one from last night, Officer Daniels, carried a clipboard. Another officer followed, holding a camera. "Morning, folks," Daniels said, voice clipped but polite. "We'll need a few minutes of your time. Standard follow-up." Mark nodded, but my pulse spiked. Standard? Nothing about this felt standard. Inside the taped perimeter, I watched the photographer snap pictures of the kitchen window frame, the charred remains of curtains, the scorched floorboards. Daniels guided me to the curb. His words were calm, measured, but the questions were anything but casual. "Did you notice any unusual smells before the alarm? Were any appliances left on? Has anyone besides you and your husband had access to the house recently?" I answered carefully, aware of Linda's figure in the background. She was pretending to chat with a neighbor, but her eyes flicked to us again and again. Mark stepped in. "Officer, are you saying someone could have set this? You think it's arson?" His voice cracked, anger and fear tangled. Daniels didn't confirm, but his silence was answer enough. That's when Linda strode across the street, her heels clicking against the asphalt like gavel strikes. "Is this really necessary?" she said, arms crossed. "They've been through enough without being interrogated like criminals." I flinched at the word criminals. Daniels didn't. He simply turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am, we're following protocol. Fires like this are rarely random." Her smile faltered, but she recovered quickly, tilting her head. "Well, maybe if Emily paid more attention to housekeeping, we wouldn't be here. She's always been careless." The words sliced clean through me. Careless. That was her story. Careless wife, careless mother, careless enough to burn down her own house. She wasn't just erasing me anymore, she was framing me. Mark exploded before I could. "Mom, stop. You saw what happened last night. You told people she was dead before anyone knew. Do you have any idea what that sounded like?" Neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Eyes turned. The cracks in Linda's mask showed. Just for a moment. Her jaw tightened. "I was in shock," she snapped. "Unlike some people, I don't crumble when things get hard. I take charge." Daniel stepped between them, his voice sharp now. "Ma'am, that'll be enough. We'll need you to answer questions separately later." Her gaze darted from him back to me, and I swear in that instant her eyes said more than her mouth ever could. It wasn't shock, it wasn't grief, it was a challenge. By the time the officers left, my decision was made. I couldn't keep playing polite daughter-in-law while she painted me as reckless. I turned to Mark, my voice trembling but steady enough to cut the air. "We can't stay here. Not with her across the street, watching us. Not with her twisting every word." Mark hesitated, His whole life had been built in her shadow. But then he looked at the ruin of our house, then at our daughter asleep in the car seat. His shoulders sagged. You're right. I pulled out my phone, hands shaking. This wasn't the old Emily, the one who swallowed insults, who smiled through humiliation. This was the Emily who had walked through fire and refused to be buried twice. I called my sister 2 towns over. Can we stay with you for a while? My voice cracked, but I didn't care. It's not safe here. She didn't ask for details. She just said yes. As we packed what little survived a few bags, Mark's laptop, a singed photo album, I saw Linda watching from the lawn. She didn't shout. She didn't come closer. She just lifted her coffee cup slightly, like a toast, a silent promise that this wasn't over. When we pulled away, my chest tightened. Not just from the smoke damage, but from the certainty growing inside me. The fire might have gutted our house, but it was Linda's lies that threatened to destroy everything else. And for the first time, I wasn't planning to let her. At my sister's house, the quiet should have been comforting, but it wasn't. Every creak of the floorboards jolted me awake. Every shadow in the hallway made me wonder if Linda was out there, watching. Mark tried to calm me, whispering that we were safe, but neither of us truly believed it. You don't walk away from a fire like that and still feel safe. 2 days later, Officer Daniels called. His voice was professional, but there was an edge to it. We'd like you and your husband to come down to the station. There are some updates on the fire report you should hear in person. My stomach dropped. Updates. That word alone made my skin crawl. At the station, Daniels guided us into a small room with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. He laid out photos on the table. Charred walls, melted wires, the kitchen window frame. Then he pointed to a darker stain along the floorboards. This, he said, tapping the photo, is evidence of accelerant. It wasn't just a grease fire or a faulty outlet. Someone poured something. The room spun. My throat tightened. Mark stiffened in his chair, staring at the photo as if it might rearrange itself if he looked long enough. Daniels continued, his voice lower now. We also have statements from neighbors. Several recall your mother-in-law arriving before the fire department, and one even claims she was already saying you hadn't survived before anyone had confirmed. That's unusual. Unusual. Such a thin word for something so sinister. I whispered, So you're saying it was intentional? That someone wanted this? Daniels didn't nod, didn't shake his head. We're saying it's under investigation. But yes, this was not an accident. Mark finally spoke, his voice raw. You think my mother had something to do with this? Daniels didn't answer directly. Instead, he slid another paper across the table, a transcript of a 911 call. The timestamp showed it came in minutes before the alarm at our house went off. The caller had reported a fire on Maple Drive, but gave no house number. The voice, though faint, was familiar. It was Linda. Mark's jaw clenched so tight, I thought his teeth might crack. She called it in before it even happened? Daniels leaned back. It raises questions, and we'll be asking her those questions. The room went silent except for the buzz of the lights. I felt a chill crawl up my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. That evening, back at my sister's, Mark paced the living room like a man trapped in a cage. I can't believe this, he muttered over and over. I kept telling myself she was manipulative, controlling, but this? Setting a fire? Telling people you were dead? That's... He trailed off, unable to finish. I finally stood, my voice sharper than I expected. Mark, you saw her face. You saw how calm she was when she said I was gone. That wasn't shock. That was satisfaction. He stopped pacing, his shoulders sagging. For the first time, he didn't argue. The next day, Daniels called again. This time, his tone was heavier. We brought your mother-in-law in for questioning. She denied everything, of course, but her story doesn't line up. And Emily, I want you to be careful. Sometimes when someone feels their control slipping, that's when they're most dangerous. Later that evening, Linda showed up at my sister's front porch. No warning, just her car in the driveway, her knock sharp against the door. When I opened it, she stood there in a crisp blazer as if she were heading to a business meeting, not a confrontation with the daughter-in-law she'd declared dead days earlier. Emily, she said smoothly, We need to talk. Every instinct screamed, no, but I didn't slam the door. Not yet. Behind me, Mark hovered, tense. Linda stepped closer, lowering her voice. You've been telling lies about me, to the police, to neighbors. To Mark. That's dangerous. You don't want to turn my son against me. You'll regret it if you do. The audacity made my blood boil. Regret it? I said, my voice trembling but loud enough for Mark to hear. Linda, you told people I was dead while I was still breathing. You erased me before the flames were even out. If anyone's lying, it's you. Her face hardened, all pretense of charm slipping. Be careful, Emily. Fires can happen again. Accidents can happen again. Mark stepped forward then, his body between us. His voice shook with rage. Mom, if you ever come near Emily or our daughter again, I swear... Linda cut him off, her smile flickering back like a mask snapping into place. Oh, Mark, you're confused. You always have been. One day you'll see I was right. She turned, heels clicking against the driveway, leaving the air heavier than before. Inside, I collapsed onto the couch, shaking. Mark sat beside me, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. For once, his silence didn't feel like weakness. It felt like a storm gathering, one that was finally ready to break. And as I pressed my head against his chest, I realized the fire had destroyed more than our home. It had burned away the illusions we clung to about Linda. The truth was out now, smoldering but undeniable. 2 weeks after the fire, Mark and I sat in the same small station room where the investigation had started. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee, and the buzzing lights overhead felt harsher than ever. Officer Daniels walked in holding a folder so thick it looked like it might burst. He didn't sit right away. He just stood there for a moment, studying us, his jaw tight. I have the final report, he said at last, sliding into the chair across from us. You both deserve to hear it before anyone else. My palms dampened against the table. Mark's hand found mine, and his grip told me he was bracing for the same blow I was. Daniels opened the folder. The fire was no accident. Accelerant was confirmed throughout the kitchen and near the back door. We found traces on the doorknob, which means whoever started it wanted to block escape. I sucked in a sharp breath. My lungs still ached when I inhaled too quickly, but the real pain was the image his words painted. Someone deliberately trapping us inside. Mark's voice was hoarse. Do you know who did it? Daniel's eyes flicked up. We can't make formal accusations without charges, but we traced the purchase of the accelerant to a receipt. It was bought at a hardware store less than a mile from your home, paid in cash. He slid the receipt copy across the table. On the signature line, in rushed, unmistakable handwriting, was one name, Linda. My stomach flipped. I wanted to deny it, to find some explanation, but the proof lay flat on the table, undeniable. Mark leaned back, his hands on his face. She really did this, he whispered. She tried to kill my wife, my daughter. Daniel spoke carefully. She won't face trial until prosecutors decide there's enough to move forward. But I need you both to prepare yourselves. People like her, when they realize their grip is slipping, they don't let go quietly. That night, back at my sister's, the weight of it all crashed down. Linda wasn't just manipulative, or jealous, or controlling. She was dangerous. And for the first time, Mark admitted what I had always known. I spent my whole life trying to keep her happy, he said, pacing the living room. And she nearly destroyed everything I love. I won't let her win again. Hearing him say it felt like breathing fresh air after weeks of smoke. Still, fear lingered. I kept replaying her last words on the porch. Accidents can happen again. Days later, a restraining order was filed. Daniels promised extra patrols near my sister's street. Life felt like a fragile balance, one wrong move and the pieces would shatter again. But amidst the fear, something shifted. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I stopped shrinking when Linda's name was mentioned. I had survived fire, lies, and erasure, and still stood breathing. For once, I wasn't just enduring, I was claiming my place back. One evening, as I tucked my daughter into bed at my sister's house, she whispered, "Mommy, are we safe here?" My throat tightened, but I kissed her forehead. "Yes, baby. We're safe. I promise." It wasn't a promise I could guarantee, not with Linda's shadow still looming, but it was a promise I intended to fight for every single day. The truth is, fires don't just burn down houses. They strip away illusions. They show you who stands with you when the smoke clears and who tried to light the match. And as much as this story still twists in my chest, there's a lesson I'll never unlearn. Family isn't defined by blood or titles. It's defined by who protects you when everything's at risk. If you've ever felt erased, doubted, or silenced by someone who should have loved you, know this: you're not alone. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to disappear, even when someone else tries to write your ending. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If you want to hear more hidden truths families try to bury, subscribe to Hidden Family Lies. Because the most powerful way to fight the dark is to keep shining light on it.